While these people are taking their seats, I do want to introduce Chrisitan Belady. Let him come up. Chrisitan is head of cloud infrastructure and architecture for Microsoft. And following Joe's presentation, I think you're going to find this particularly interesting on the journey to renewables at megascale. Chrisitan, thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. So my presentation is very simple. What Joe said. So what you're gonna see, and where's the clicker? What you're gonna see is amazing parallels in our presentations, and in fact, even like the network and data center slides, it's striking, and you'll see what I mean here in a minute. Like Joe, renewables is an important thing for me, and sustainability is an important thing for me. As many of you know, PUE was something that I conceived back in 2001, and it was all to drive efficiency. And so we all, and by the way, how much time do I have? Oh, that's a mistake. So I'll ask you, how much time do I have, Dean? Okay. So anyway, it's an important thing for all of us. I think, you know, we have challenges on this globe. The population is increasing. All of that. Joe did a really eloquent job of talking about it. So I'm going to skip that stuff. Okay, which one's going forward? All right, Joe, which button did you press? Oh. Okay, got it. Okay, here we go. Okay, I see where this is going already. I kept quiet the whole time. That one, down button. Okay, thank you. Great. Okay, so this will be fun. I was also going to say that the problem, we have a panel afterwards, and the problem is I pretty much agree with everything Joe has to say. And so I don't know how good of a panel it will be. You want debate. You want differences of opinion. We agree on a lot of stuff, but after that, so all right. So here is our some of our data center regions and data center locations across the globe. I have some pictures of some of the data centers. It's global. I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. I've been honored to lead the team that built most of this stuff out and ran the thing. You know, it's a lot of work. And, you know, one of the things Joe, same sort of thing. I don't think people understand the amount of work that it takes to build this stuff globally and the commitment from all the people. So I've been blessed to be part of this industry. I've been blessed to work with people who are able to accomplish what I think is something no one would have ever conceived 10 years ago. So I think it's great stuff. Now, similarly, with the network, this almost looks identical to Joe's slide. That's what I was laughing when I was looking at it. Same sort of network, but we're doing incredible stuff on the network side. I mean, Microsoft, jointly with Facebook in this case, we actually committed to a project that we're laying cable across the ocean. And I love this headline here that it says, that was the first time people said Microsoft is badass. So we have to highlight that. But this is the cable that's going to be going from Virginia to Spain. You know, the guy who architected it on my team, Frank Ray, I saw you somewhere, Frank. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Great work on doing that project. But this is the kind of stuff we're doing. You know, if you would have asked me 10 years ago when I first joined Microsoft, would I have ever imagined that this is the kind of stuff I'd be involved in? I mean, I was a computational fluid dynamicist. That's how my career started. And now this is what's happening. I mean, we are so lucky to have these opportunities to be in the things that we're doing now. And this is just another great example. All right. So, like Joe, We have all these different areas that we work on from a sustainability standpoint. Site selection, design and construction, I don't have to get into all the details. Joe did a great job talking about it. We're doing all those things. Not only that, in each of these areas, we're also investing with startup companies to really, where we see that they could have game-changing technologies in all these areas, to see how can we take that technology, bring it into our ecosystem to really change the game. What I'm mostly interested in is changing the game. That's why I got into this industry. That's why I continue to want to be in this industry, although sooner or later, Father Time will shoot me in the head, but hopefully that's further out than now. But the bottom line is, I think there's still so much we can do. But we're working in all these different areas, operational efficient. I mean, I was listening to Joe, and it's like boom, 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 all these things, same thing. So what does that tell you? That tells you should go to the cloud, because we're already doing all this for you. All right, so let's talk more about renewable, because that's what I was told that I should talk about. We are constantly improving our mix. I think it's great work. You guys are doing 100%. We are 100% carbon neutral, but it's not, right now, some of that is through purchasing of RECs. We are retiring all the attributes for the renewable sources that we have developed, and I'll show you those here in a minute. I think one of the things Joe failed to mention, that most of the companies out there, not Google, but most of the companies out there don't retire the RECs that come with the projects. They resell them to fund their projects for more renewables. So if you don't retire them, you've sold those attributes to someone else. Really, they own the attribute then, right? You no longer could claim that you are doing renewables. And so this is something that I think we as industry leaders really abide by very strongly, to retire those attributes. And that's a key point. We invest in new technologies, I already mentioned that. And as Joe was talking about earlier, there's a lot of support from folks like ourselves at the scale we're operating to really change policy and to drive policy. All right. So this is our version of what Joe showed and how our plan is. One of the challenges we have had is our incredible growth. You have to change your mix to 100%. You have to have projects, viable projects around at a faster rate than what you're building, because from your legacy builds from 10 years ago, you also have to make those renewables. And so we have a team that's working on new projects, looking for viable projects. Now, as a result of this, what we're finding, and particularly in the new regimes and the new environments, that there's less and less support for these projects. So we have to come around and innovate with new ways to make these projects viable. So I'll talk about that here shortly. Here are the projects that we have across the globe. It's about, if you add it all up, it's about 0.5 gigawatt. Most of these have been signed, I think, in the past 2 years or so, maybe 3. Most of it is all in the US right now, but what I'm going to talk about is this latest one we announced, which was in the Kansas project. We call it the Bloom project, which had an interesting structure. So I'm trying to get through this fast, Dean, so you could. So this was a project, and in fact, I should state that what we're about to talk here got Deal of the Year by the other, the utility and financial side of the business or the industry, and we're getting an award for this later this week here in New York. It's a black tie affair, so I'm not going, but some guys on my team are. But the key thing here is, one of the problems we have is, if you look at renewable projects, and Joel will tell you the same thing, there tends to be a significant premium with renewable projects. So you can either pay it, but depending on whether there's incentives or not, those projects tend to be not that viable. And the ones that are viable, we tend to suck up pretty quick. So how do you make projects with all the volatility? You know, there's risk around pricing, of course, the production, wind stops, wind blows, sun goes down, stays up, so on. How do you take that and the premium associated with that and mitigate that, right? Because for the guy producing, if the wind doesn't blow, he doesn't make money. For the guy taking it, if the wind doesn't blow, he needs to do something, right? So there's a lot of risks associated with it. And so now also you look at the weather. There's more risk in the weather. It's not predictable. Yet we're doing these contracts long term. How do you make sure the costs are covered and it's viable? So in this particular deal, what we've done is we introduced a reinsurance market. And we looked for people who actually want risk. And in particular, what they want is non-correlated risks to their portfolio. So they take risk. You know, reinsurance takes risks from all over. And I'm not an expert in this stuff. If you want a deeper dive, you could certainly talk to my energy team. But what we brought to the table is a risk that they didn't have, a risk profile that they didn't have in their risk portfolio. It's sort of like the stock market. If you buy one stock, it's volatile. You don't know what the hell is going to happen to it. So then you go and you do a mutual fund where you aggregate all the stocks, and all of a sudden now you have a very predictable return. And this is essentially the same thing. So what they're doing is they're taking that risk, bundling it, and so then from our standpoint, now working through them, we have very predictable cost. The project owner now doesn't have to have the premium because the reinsurance market will pay the constant stream. So we've actually mitigated all this, and this made this 180 megawatt project a viable project. You know, has additionality like Joe was talking about, but it wouldn't have happened under any circumstance unless someone wanted to spend substantially more for the energy, which would have not been good business decision. And so what we see is these kind of models are the ones that will actually promote much faster, more rapid adoption of renewables. We're hoping that this will, like Joe said, we're hoping that this would enable others to do similar type of projects so that now, before there was only, you know, maybe 20% of the grid could have been renewables because from a financial standpoint it was just not viable, to now much larger percentage. So I think one of the important things when you look at cloud providers is because of the scale at which we're operating, we could actually start doing things differently and really open up new opportunities for everyone else to adopt some of those practices. So it's a great example for me. Another one. The problem when you build at our scale is you go to, your sites end up having substantial impact to the utilities. You know, in the case of Cheyenne, our load is comparable to the load of the city. And so when you have to expand the site, it also means that the utility needs to increase its capacity. You add 20 megawatts, utility needs to add 20 megawatts of capacity. Well, we look at that and we go, that just doesn't make sense. Because our 20 megawatts of capacity, just like down here I'm showing, utility adds a generator, we add a generator because we've increased our capacity by 20 megawatts. How does that make sense? So the team looked at it, and my team, they're deep utility experts, they came from the utility industry, looked at it and they said, we need to figure out how to do this differently. What can we do to change the game? This is what I always ask them. I want to change the game. So we spent time with the utility and said, look, what if on our site we put fast start utility or a fast start generation, gas generation turbines? That's actually your asset. We just happen to have it behind our substation. We are effectively adding capacity that you don't have to. Now, at first, it's tough for the utility to understand because this has never been done. But as we started digging into it more, we just started realizing, you know, we're going to put the natural gas, instead of the diesel generators, we're going to put natural gas here. They could eliminate any generation. So this is what we're doing, and they don't have to add any additional capacity. Now, some people will say, oh, that's demand response. No, it's not. Demand response is a reactive situation for cases where you have some extreme weather or whatever. This is actually part of the utility's plan as their capacity. So they are, as they plan out for the next 5, 10 years, they look at this as part of the capacity and not a reaction to some, you know, corner case spike. Because remember, the utilities, there's the power you use, and they also have a capacity, and there's a capacity charge that goes in there. Now, the key thing with this is a huge savings for the utility. Well, guess what? Because we're doing them a favor, they also help us, right, by giving us better rates. And so the neat thing about this is it ends up being a win-win. There's less embedded carbon. We're changing the game on how this all operates and so on. Now, you can also see long-term how when you start building this distributed model and this kind of model, one of the best-kept secrets about renewables is every time you put in a wind project, you're also putting in peaker plants. Peaker plants are less efficient than, you know, 24/7 type generation because they have to respond quickly, up and down, wind stops up and down. So now you can start looking at this stuff and go, hey, you know, maybe we can just leverage these assets. So when you start looking at this as a large ecosystem rather than data center, utility, you know, a supply chain, and you start integrating the ecosystem, there's these opportunities that are unbelievable. And so we have a lot more stuff coming down the pipe. You'll see some more announcements related to this type of thing and new project structures. Finally, on the last slide, one of the things that I've talked about for a decade is the notion of a data plant, of really this integration of the utility and the data center, and IT effectively. It's been always very frustrating to me that we have all this conversion, all this stuff going on everywhere. At the end of the day, it all goes down to 1 volt to DC approximately in the CPU. And we do all this stuff way out here, generate power. A lot of times it's DC, you convert it to AC, it goes far, far away, loses, you know, all along the way you're generating heat, which means it's inefficient. And then comes over here, we've got diesel generation, we've got all the switching gear, transformers, all that stuff. Why? And you could have gas here too. We've actually gone, and right down here, we've got a project that what you see there is a fuel cell driven rack. That was our first phase of the project. You'll see a lot more in the press coming up where we are actually piloting a small scale data center with fuel cells. Now the interesting thing, people will say fuel cells are not viable, too expensive. But again, we want to look at it as changing the game, right? Let's integrate the whole ecosystem. When you get rid of all this stuff here, that's all cost. It collapses. Now all of a sudden the fuel cell, it's cheap, right? So that's how we like to look at things is how do we look at what's out there? We integrate the hell out of it, rethink it, and because of the scale at which we're operating, we can do these things. This is what the breakthrough is, and this is what, frankly, gets me excited about being in this industry. You know, sure, I could do all those other things, but at the end of the day, it's really this kind of innovation, business innovation, whether it's on the data centers, on land, on energy, on the network. It's this integrated business innovation that I think is going to be what's going to change the future on adoption for all this stuff. That's how we have to really look at it. So that's my presentation, and I think that's it.